So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. My name is Mark Elliott. I'm the director of the Fairbank Center for Chinese Studies here at Harvard. And on behalf of all my colleagues and associates at the Fairbank Center, I would like to welcome you to today's very special event honoring the two men who form one of the great film partnerships in the world today, Eileen Li and James Schamus. Now, I typically introduce myself as the Mark Schwartz Professor of Chinese and Inter-Asian History and Fairbank Center Director, da-da-da-da-da. But today I get to add a third title, which is Official Harvard Fan of Eileen Li. So I've been a fan of his for about 20 years now, ever since I saw The Wedding Banquet, when that came out back in 1993, when I was my first year as an assistant professor. And as a historian, and particularly as a historian of the Qing dynasty, the Qing period, I was especially delighted by Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, Wohu Canglong, otherwise known at the court of the Qianlong Emperor as Dodoro Tascha Daldara Mudri in the Manchu language. But I never thought I would get to say thank you to the director and the writer of that amazing movie for bringing the Xinjiang frontier of the Qing period to life on the big screen. So thank you very much for that. And as someone who spent half his life studying the Manchus, I can say with authority that rarely have they looked so good as when portrayed by Zhang Ziyi. So I realize, of course, we have a whole room full of Eileen Li fans gathered here today for the start of what is certain to be a very memorable series of events today and tomorrow. And like you, I've been looking forward to this for quite some time. So my main job today, really, as I see it, is to get out of the way as quickly as possible. I would like, however, first to take this opportunity to thank my colleagues in the Department of East Asian Languages and Civilizations, David Wang and Li Jie, for conceiving the idea for this event and for helping to make it happen, and for allowing the Fairbank Center to be part of it. We are thrilled to be one of the sponsors for today. I'd also like to recognize the other sponsors as well. These include the CCK Foundation, the Zhang Jingguo Foundation of the Inter-University Center for Sinology, the Harvard Film Archive, my own department, EALC, along with our partners and friends at the Taipei Economic and Cultural Office. So now I am most pleased to introduce my dear colleague, Professor Diana Sorensen, who is Dean of Arts and Humanities in the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. Professor Sorensen is James F. Rothenberg Professor of Romance, Languages and Literatures and of Comparative Literature, and in my book is easily Harvard's most eloquent and elegant spokesperson for the arts. Dean Sorensen.
Thank you, Mark. You can barely see me, but it's a great pleasure to welcome you all to this wonderful session, and a great pleasure to welcome Eileen Li to Harvard on behalf of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, and also Professor Schamus. So, what a wonderful event. It represents the importance of East Asian languages and civilizations in the life of Harvard University. It's a wonderful department that I've admired for a long time. I'm thrilled that Professor David Wang and Jie Li have managed this extraordinary event. I also want to say, Eileen Li, that as a Latin Americanist, I find your work extraordinary because wherever you land on the planet, there's always the creative, innovative gaze of somebody who is diasporic, as am I. And I celebrate that diasporic gaze that may alight in the English countryside, on the Pacific Ocean, in the mountains of Brokeback Mountains. It may alight on questions of gender and sexuality, on the mysteries of food and the libidinal drives, wherever your gaze and your artistry land, I find a lot that is revealing and extraordinary. So I'm sure this is going to be a remarkable afternoon. I wish you all a truly productive set of sessions. And again, welcome.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is David Wang. I teach modern Chinese literature and culture at Harvard University. On behalf of the CCK Foundation, it is really a great honor for me to stand here to welcome Mr. Eileen Li and my former colleague at Columbia University, Professor James Schamus. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank the Fairbank Center for hosting this event in collaboration with the Harvard Film Archive and the Department of East Asian Languages and Civilizations. And of course, we want to thank TECO for all logistic support. Your generosity is truly, sincerely recognized. And of course, the last but not least, I want to mention one man's name, David Li. And I want to thank David Li, the sort of commander-in-chief type of person, right, in the Eileen Li team, always the invisible person, but we thank him for making this event possible for us here at Harvard. I'm not an expert on film studies, and I, just like all of you, I am eager to hear my colleagues' comments and reflections on Li's cinematic achievements. My colleagues from Duke University, from Princeton University, from Texas, and from the Great Boston area. Definitely, this is going to be a very productive and dynamic afternoon for all of us. But here, please allow me to make two small notes as a way to concluding my welcome remarks. That is, Harvard University started its East Asian Visual and Media Study program just about a couple of years ago. And earlier this year, we made a very successful hire of a specialist in Chinese film, and Professor Li Jie, who will serve as the moderator of our first panel. And certainly, we look forward to many more years to come in promoting and publicizing the academic side of film studies here at Harvard. And finally, a personal note. Eileen Li was from Taiwan, and I was from Taiwan too. We were born on this island, and we share similar background in growing up. Probably that's something I can feel proud of. And truly, as a fan of Eileen Li's production, I've always admired his love for Taiwan and his embrace of the whole world. Truly, it's a really great honor for me to be here to welcome someone from Taiwan. And finally, small note. Happy birthday, Eileen Li. 生日快乐. Thank you. And now, without further ado, may I have the honor to introduce Professor Jie Li, who will serve as moderator of the first panel of this afternoon's symposium. Thank you. Thank you.
Good afternoon. It's such a great honor to introduce Director Eileen Li as we gather here to discuss and celebrate his extraordinary career, whether set in Jane Austen's England or Eileen Chang's Shanghai, the American West or Qing Dynasty China. Each one of Eileen Li's movies resonates with a broad transnational audience at a deeply personal level. And given such a broad range of subject matter and genre, what critics have often tried to pinpoint certain common themes and common threads in on these films, such as repression, freedom, family, food, the figure of the father and the outsider. And on a personal note, I just want to say that as I grew up really watching and rewatching so many of these films, they also struck me as cinematic rites of passage. They're coming-of-age stories that enchant and disenchant and re-enchant the world. So Eileen Li was born in Taiwan in 1954 to parents from mainland China. His father, the principal of his high school, valued academic achievement and disapproved of a career in the arts. For those of you undergraduates who have a similar kind of dilemma. You have to pursue your dreams. And after studying acting at the National Taiwan College of the Arts, he came to the U.S. to study theater direction at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and received an MFA in film production at New York University. His 1985 thesis film, Fine Line, won NYU's awards for Best Film and Best Director, and this will be screened on Sunday at the Harvard Film Archive. 6 years later, he made his first feature film, Pushing Hands, after winning both first and second place in the Taiwanese National Screenwriting Competition. His second movie, The Wedding Banquet, which a few of you mentioned, won the Golden Bear at the Berlin Film Festival, and also many fans around the world. Each Drink Man Woman completed his Father Knows Best trilogy, portraying Confucian families in the modern world with humor and pathos. A line from this film, Eat, Drink, Man, Woman, where one sister says to the other, "What do you know of my heart?" convinced Emma Thompson that Ang Lee would be the perfect director to direct Sense and Sensibility, which also contained the same line where one sister says to the other. And then he went on to Hollywood to make The Ice Storm, a family drama set in 1970 suburban Connecticut, followed by an American Civil War epic, Ride with the Devil. In 2000, of course, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon completely revolutionized the wuxia genre and became the highest grossing foreign language film ever released in America. In Hulk, Lee turned a comic book superhero into a psychological portrait of a son cursed by his father's pride. And probably familiar to many of you is Brokeback Mountain, a story about the forbidden love between two Wyoming cowboys. Actually, tonight there will be the opening film at the Harvard Film Archive, Lust Caution, also generated very heated discussion throughout cultural China. And most recently, as everyone knows, he made a spectacular and philosophical 3D movie about a boy and a tiger en route from India to Canada. And we're all waiting with bated breath for the next movie on the boxing legend. Muhammad Ali. So in addition to Ang Lee, we're very honored and delighted to welcome Professor James Schamus, who has served as producer and screenwriter for nearly all of Ang Lee's films. Theirs is absolutely one of the most constant and fruitful collaborations in the history of cinema. Mr. Schamus also co-founded Good Machine and Focus Features and has been professor of professional practice at Columbia University School of the Arts. Following the Symposium, 6 of Ang Lee's 12 feature films will be playing at the Harvard Film Archive. And before asking Director Ang Lee to come on stage to say hello to the audience, I have asked all the panelists for today to choose a few of their favorite moments from the various films, and we try to put together a compilation of these moments, thanks to the invaluable editing assistance of Benny Schaefer. And I wanted to play this for you. It's almost impossible to put together a 3-minute trailer into such a wonderful body of work. We just hope that this tribute can refresh your memories of the films that you have already seen and also intrigue you to watch the ones you have not yet. So here we go.
Why, you little Dutch son of a bitch. You do what I tell you or I'll kill you.
And when you figure to do this mean thing to me, Maxson?
Is this very moment convenient for you? It is for me.
Dear Lord, thank you for this Thanksgiving holiday, and for all the material possessions that we have and enjoy, and for letting us white people kill all the Indians and steal their tribal lands and stuff ourselves like pigs, even though children in Asia are being napalmed.
Jesus, enough, all right.
He's curate of the parish, I dare say.
Or perhaps a handsome lieutenant.
Give us a clue, Miss Dashwood. Is he in uniform?
He has no profession.
Oh.
No profession. So he's a gentleman, then.
Okay, now you. I, we.
Oui, oui.
Take you, we, Tang.
Oui, oui.
Okay. To be my wedded husband. To have and to hold.
Holding to have husband of my...
For better, for worse, for richer, for poor.
Better and richer. No, poor.
In sickness and in health till death do us part.
Till sickness and death.
Thank you very much. I think my father would be very happy to know finally I get into Harvard. And he's a person who's like always wanted me to teach. When I got my first Oscar, he would say, "You got an Oscar. You're happy now. It's time to do something for real." So I'm very happy here and a lot of pressure. It's Harvard, and thank you for the happy birthdays. Actually, that was 2 days ago. You just saw a shot in Last Caution with the tricycle rickshaw guy in the back, who's taking our leading actress to a theater, and in the back there's a number. That was actually my birthday. I thought I would keep that a secret, but it's Harvard. You're special, so I share that with you. I hope you will have a good afternoon. I'm sure all the scholars have more interesting to say about my own movies. In every movie, I'm like guinea pig. I want to confess to you, I'm not the author, initiator, or creator of this movie. I'm actually a slave to those movies. The movie wants to meet you guys and through me, and I'm spent and I got chewed and spit out, and I hate those movies. I couldn't watch them, but I do appreciate the time I spent with that. I'm very precious about that. It's like mood. There's hardly any reasons, but it's occasion like this I have to give it a narrative, give it a reason. But when I'm spending time with this movie, I'm like Pi spending time with that tiger, floating across the Pacific. The only thing I know is I'm with God. God not as a religious God, but the emotional connection to the unknown self, so to speak. I was in that zone. So I don't know how to share that with you. I'll do my best. I'm pretty sure it's not anything reasonable or offensive, but I'll share as much. I'm a nice guy, so I'll try my best. Thank you. I hope you have a good time this afternoon. I do my best.
So we have 4 speakers in the first panel, and so we invited 4 scholars to each give 10 to 12-minute presentations on a different aspect of Ang Li's work. Our first panelist is Christina Klein, a professor of English and American Studies at Boston College. She is the author of Cold War Orientalism, Asia in the Middle Brow Imagination, and is currently working on a book about popular Korean cinema of the 1950s. She will speak to us about the diasporic dimensions in Ang Li's work.
Thank you, Jay and David, for inviting me to participate in this roundtable. It's a real pleasure and honor to be part of this event with Ang Li and James Schamus and all the other scholars, so thank you very much. I'm going to confine my remarks to Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, which I think really exemplifies Ang Li's work as a transnational filmmaker. Crouching Tiger was a landmark film in a number of ways. Here in the US, it made that rare transition out of the art houses and into the multiplexes to become the most commercially successful foreign language film in US history, and the first Chinese language film, of course, to be nominated for a Best Picture Oscar. Released at the turn of the millennium, it also made us aware of just how global contemporary cinema was becoming. On the one hand, Crouching Tiger was a very local film rooted in the stories and landscapes and languages of mainland China. But on the other hand, it was astoundingly global in its financing and its production. As James Schamus very helpfully wrote in a New York Times article, the script was co-written by a New York-based writer working in English, which is Schamus himself, and a Taiwan-based writer working in Chinese. Funds came from the Hong Kong branch of a Japanese-owned Hollywood studio, and the actual production involved companies based in 5 different countries. Crouching Tiger wasn't the only film made this way, of course, but it made the global networks of film production more visible than they had been before. The question for scholars is, how do we understand and explain a given film's or a given director's transnational dimension, its unique balance of global and local elements? What kind of conceptual framework can best illuminate a film's ties to cultures, institutions, people, and resources around the world? I think the notion of diaspora can be particularly illuminating, and I propose that we read Crouching Tiger as a work of diasporic cinema. A diaspora is a transnational community created when a people disperses from an original homeland and resettles in multiple new locations. Ang Li belongs to the Chinese diaspora. His parents were born and raised on the mainland, fled during the Civil War of the late 1940s, and resettled in Taiwan, where Li was born in 1954. In the 1970s, he joined a second diasporic move that sent many young Taiwanese to the United States for higher education, and he eventually settled in New York, where he began making movies. A diaspora is defined in part by its members' participation in a triangular network of relationships. I would suggest that Ang Li's enmeshment in these relationships is part of what gives Crouching Tiger its distinctive shape and feel. The first of these relationships is to the lost homeland, a place distant in both geographic space and time. A collective memory of the homeland typically suffuses diasporic cultures and fuels a desire for return. Sometimes that return is literal, sometimes it's symbolic, but the ideal of some kind of return to a homeland remains powerful. Think of the phrase, "next year in Jerusalem," that concludes the Jewish Seder. Because of the Cold War, Li didn't have much or any direct contact with communist China when he was growing up. But in interviews, he has spoken about the old China, the dream of China, that he learned about from his parents' memories and from the swordplay martial arts films that he watched and loved as a child. Unlike the kung fu films that became popular in the 1970s and had a distinctly Hong Kong sensibility, these wuxia films of the 60s were period films that evoked northern Chinese history and culture. The best wuxia films featured a graceful style of swordplay, a supernatural dimension in the ability to leap through the air, and a heroic swordswoman, played by the actress Cheng Pei, who fights injustice. With Crouching Tiger, Ang Lee made his own wuxia film. I want to look at a brief clip in which Michelle Yeoh's character, Xu Lan, battles with Zhang Ziyi's character. And let's see if I can make this work. How do I get it up on screen? Oh, there you go. You better just do it. All right. So I think that we can see here some of the generic conventions of the 1960s style wuxia film. The spectacular swordplay, not one but two female warriors, and of course the acrobatic choreography. Add to this the casting of Cheng Pei herself in the role of Jade Fox elsewhere in the film, and the echoes of that 1960s era vision of old China are complete. I think Lee's decision to make a wuxia film, a genre that, unlike the kung fu film, was not popular to among most Western viewers, can be read as a symbolic act of return to a Chinese homeland that was never a literal home to Lee, but was a powerfully imagined place nonetheless. And film genre serves as the vehicle for making that return. The second relationship that defines diaspora is the one that exists among members of the dispersed community in the present. Beyond simply putting the diasporic dream of China on screen, Crouching Tiger's production served as a bridge to other members of the community. The screen credits are a virtual who's who of the ethnic Chinese creative talent. Among the actors, Zhang Ziyi is from the mainland, Chang Chen from Taiwan, Chow Yun-fat from Hong Kong, and Michelle Yeoh from Malaysia. Mainland-born Tan Dun, who composed the soundtrack, ended up in the US, as did the cellist Yo-Yo Ma, who was born in Paris. The fight choreographer Yen Wu-ping was born on the mainland, built his career in Hong Kong, and has worked in Hollywood. And so on down through the credits. Like Lee's cinematic memories of a lost China, his lateral ties to other members of the diaspora also shaped the film's form. The clip we just saw, for example, features Yen Wu-ping's distinctive style of martial arts choreography. Yuan likes to stage fights within a self-contained space that suggests a performance arena. In this scene, the courtyard acts as such a space. Its enclosed shape visually defined by the stone floor and the vertical boards of the walls. Yuan choreographed the cinematography as well, and with Lee, shaped the viewer's perception of the fight by varying the location of the camera. Sometimes moving in close to show the women's faces, sometimes pulling back to reveal their bodies in motion, other times positioning the camera overhead so as to abstract their movements into two-dimensional swirls of light and dark. Yuan also delights in the creative use of props. Much of the dynamic in this fight revolves around the vast array of weapons, including 3 swords, a spear, a pair of hooked swords, a heavy cudgel, and a staff, I think that's the whole list, that Xu Lan must eventually call upon to defeat the younger woman. In some sense, then, we can read this as a Yen Wu-ping scene, as well as an Ang Lee scene. By tapping into the talents of the diaspora, by hiring Yen Wu-ping and all the others, Lee enriched his own artistic vision by showcasing their distinctive styles. The third relationship that defines diaspora is the one that connects its members to their host lands, the countries in which they resettled. In contrast to immigrant discourse, which emphasizes assimilation, diasporic discourse emphasizes a partial embrace of the norms and traditions of the host country. This often leads to the creolization of cultural forms brought over from the homeland. In Crouching Tiger, Li displays his partial embrace of the conventions of Hollywood cinema. Li and Schamus saw the martial arts genre as traditionally being plagued by a lack of integration between the narrative and the spectacle. The fight scenes, rather than growing logically out of the story and moving it forward, too often brought it to a halt. With Crouching Tiger, Li sought to solve this problem by creating a truly integrated martial arts film, in which the narrative and the spectacular fight scenes enhanced one another. The classical Hollywood musical, which embeds song and dance performances into a narrative structure, provided a kind of model for how to do this. Like a musical, Crouching Tiger subordinates its spectacle to the demands of the story. It treats martial arts scenes not as narrative interludes, but as opportunities to develop psychologically complex characters and to express themes in a visually dynamic way. In the courtyard fight scene, for instance, it is funny when Xu Lan struggles with a heavy weapon while Jen looks on smirking. And if we could do this one too, please. Thank you. But like a Hollywood musical number, it is also expressive of Xu Lan's character. The middle-aged woman is weighed down by her obligations to others, by a sense of duty that constrains her actions, by the heaviness of the desires she has repressed. The adolescent Jen, in contrast, is lightened by her own narcissism. She cares only for herself, and at the end of the scene, she jumps up and out of the dark courtyard and into the blue sky above, a leap that Xu Lan is never able to make. The spectacular fight scene, instead of bringing the story to a halt, dramatizes its central theme, the tension between duty and freedom, between repressing one's desires out of loyalty to others and acting on them out of loyalty to oneself. To see Crouching Tiger as a work of diasporic cinema, then, is to see how its story and its visual style have been shaped by Li's enmeshment in a network of transnational relationships. By his desire for a symbolic return to a lost China, by his lateral ties of affiliation with other members of the diaspora, and by his partial embrace of the cinematic conventions of Hollywood. Thank you.
Next, Professor Jerome Silbergeld will speak to us about color and theme in Ang Lee's American trilogy. Jerome Silbergeld is a professor of Chinese art history and director of the Town Center for East Asian Art at Princeton University. He teaches and publishes on Song and Yuan painting, traditional Chinese architecture and gardens, and 20th century arts and cinema.
Thank you. Well, let me begin by thanking Jie. It's funny to think I was her mentor last year at Princeton. She obviously does not need a mentor. It's also a great privilege to be here with Ang Lee and James Schamus. And I'm sure you're all aware when we say Ang Lee, we mean Ang Lee and James Schamus. I suspect that each of you has thought about already within the last 15 minutes which are your favorite films and why, and given it a personal basis, and I want to begin on that same personal note. Despite having practiced Tai Chi for many years, I'm not a fan of Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and maybe I should quit while I'm ahead. But before I became aware of the richness of Chinese art, I had a very different graduate school career. I don't really know how to operate this machinery, but it can operate me. Why don't you start me off here and do what we need to do. I was intent on teaching, but three very different things from what we're talking about today. I was interested in American slavery, the Civil War that was fought because of it, and its long aftermath, which is still far from over. And that's one thing. Secondly, I was interested in the Supreme Court and how it dealt with those legal matters. And thirdly, I was especially interested in Richard Nixon, who stole racism from the Southern Democrats and breathed new life into the lost cause, minority rule, and the modern Republican Party with his so-called Southern strategy. Love it or hate it, we have all seen a demonstration of the ongoing life of Nixon's Southern strategy in just the past few weeks. I worked in the United States Senate. I shook hands with presidential candidate Richard Nixon, and then I first fell in love with Chinese art right down the street from Capitol Hill at the Freer Gallery, and that was that. It was really enormously exciting to me. As a belated convert to Chinese studies, and even later to Chinese cinema when Ang Lee began to add Americana to his career, turning Rick Moody's book, The Ice Storm, into a film that brilliantly critiques Nixonian values in America, and adapting Daniel Woodrell's literary masterpiece, Woe to Live On, into Ride with the Devil, which to me is the most authentic and insightful of all the Civil War films I've ever seen. I'd never heard of either of these books until I saw the movies. Immediately the questions come up. How is it that a foreigner seems to understand us better than we understand ourselves? And what, if anything, do these films have to do with China and its culture? What do they have to do personally with Ang Lee, or perhaps even James Schamus? Not long ago, the Journal of Chinese Cinemas asked me to write anything I wanted about color in Chinese film, and I assume that's because I had translated a book on color in Chinese painting, the only one of its kind. And I immediately seized that as the opportunity to write about these two films, which gave me finally the chance to combine my two career paths into one. Eventually, I added Brokeback Mountain, overcoming my intense dislike as a farmer goat herd for all those stupid sheep. I quickly came to the conclusion, as I always do, that the diversity of Chinese film is far too great to permit any general conclusions about the Chineseness of these films, even when compared to his Father Knows Best trilogy. But really, to study any artist, I think that you have to watch especially how either he or she responds to the particular potential of particular moments, as well as to the overall frame of the whole enterprise. Brokeback Mountain, for example, regularly contrasts the grim, dull colors of life in town with its oppressive poverty and the cultural constraints that it imposes, with the call of the wild and the brightly colored freedom that it offers to this pair of male lovers. Perhaps the most carefully colored scene of all in the film is the one with the least color, Jack's stark, deathly white boyhood home following his murder years later, when his grieving gay lover visits Jack's unforgiving, cold, and colorless father and his stoic mother, the elderly couple a shade paler even than the grim pair in Grant Wood's famous American Gothic. After a dark preview of things to come, the ice storm begins in bright sunlight, when all the decadence and hypocrisy of the characters are still tucked away, rather like David Lynch's Blue Velvet. And then things gradually descend into darkness as ugly inner truths are exposed and storm all over the set. Out of control color and patterns gone amok mark the clothes and tacky decor that label this era as the beginning of a long decline in American values. While everywhere in the film, Richard Nixon leads that downhill charge in wall posters, on television, on people's faces, on people's lips, in telephone conversations. In this one, the young Christina Ricci on the left says, "It's amazing, he ought to be shot." Speaking of Richard Nixon. Then the storm passes and the film comes to a close in sunlight with the hope that the exposure of darkness might somehow bring about a better tomorrow, though America today really remains in the thrall of Nixonian politics and the aesthetic decline of the 70s. Believe me, just look at this. This is not Abe Lincoln. Not even Franklin Roosevelt. Closest to my heart is Ang Lee's Ride with the Devil. Again come characters in dandy clothing in which we can recognize the authentic Victorian origins of styles that look ridiculously garish in the overdressed 1970s. And again comes a film that goes from bright to dark to bright, from peace to war to peace, from naive hope to tragedy to more naive hope. At its low point, the main characters literally move underground into hiding and death in the dark winter of 1862. The film's darkest moment, the horrific death of Jack Bull Childs after an improvised amputation fails to save him from gangrene and bleeds him to death instead, takes place in darkness lit only by the flames of a flickering candle, an unforgiving close-up experience in the narrow dugout that hides the group in winter. As this grisly reality tests the limits of cinematic acceptability, the film cuts to the landscape outside, to a pure white blanket of snow into which the survivors escape, providing the audience itself physical distance and emotional relief, like an anesthetic that the victim himself had none of. It plays off darkness and light, indoors and out, near and far, entrapment and escape, reminiscent in its juxtaposition of human horror and natural beauty, rather like Terrence Malick's great contemplation on warfare, The Thin Red Line. Those are just a few examples in these movies that work in this way. The film deals with the ruthless struggles between the Kansas Jayhawkers and the Missouri Bushwhackers, irregulars, fighting endless battles of local and personal revenge, independent of government command and regulation, leading to the unscrupulous raid in 1863 on Lawrence, Kansas by pro-Southern bushwhackers. Of the two main characters, both fighting for the rebels and eventually taking part in the Lawrence massacre. One is a young German, part of the large migration from Central Europe after the failed socialist uprisings of the late 1840s, many of whom ended up in Union-sympathizing Chicago and St. Louis. But Dutchy, the one above, meaning really Deutsche or German, ends up on the other side of this badly divided state, fighting on the wrong side. The other main character is a young freed black slave. By any standard of logic, both are fighting on the wrong side, and both have to guard their backsides from fragging by fellow rebels. Let's see if I can make this work. You've seen this
Why,
already.
you little Dutch son of a bitch. You do what I tell you or I'll kill you.
And when you figure to do this mean thing to me, Mackinson, is this very moment convenient for you? It is for me.
But in reality, their origins, their geographical origins, have put them here. And aside from the fact that war is hell and civil war is even worse, Ride with the Devil demonstrates that geography is fate. More importantly still is the film's insistence that the moral human being has to rise above such determinism. By the end, these two characters appear to have accomplished at least that. In no other film that I know is the Southern point of view and its internal logic better explored. To Southerners, the North was a mechanical culture. I mean especially Bostonian culture, I should say, intolerant and inflexible, and bent on reducing all things to a uniform standard, quote, with no regard for station, custom, or propriety, as one character puts it, with no respect for social or geographical diversity. And I want to show you this one clip that expresses that incredibly well.
Have you ever been to Lawrence, Kansas, young man?
No, I reckon not, Mr. Evans. Don't believe I'd be too welcome in Lawrence.
I didn't think so. Before this war began, my business took me there often. And as I saw those Northerners build that town, I witnessed the seeds of our destruction being sown.
And the founding of that town was truly the beginning of the Yankee invasion.
I'm not speaking of numbers, nor even abolitionist troublemaking. It was the schoolhouse. Before they built their church even, they built that schoolhouse. And they lettered every tailor's son and every farmer's daughter in that country.
Spelling won't help you hold the plow any firmer. Or a gun either.
No, it won't, Mr. Childs, but my point is merely that they rounded every pup up into that schoolhouse because they fancied that everyone should think and talk the same free-thinking way they do, with no regard to station, custom, propriety. And that is why they will win, because they believe everyone should live and think just like them. And we shall lose because we don't care one way or another how they live. We just worry about ourselves.
Southern whites prized their freedom to be different, despite denying freedom to people of color. But they did have their own logic, however morally compromised, and by showing a certain respect, Ang Lee's brave film demonstrates that there were deeply held visions of truth on both sides, without which this historic struggle could not have been so deep and divisive, or that war fought so long and so hard. Viewers are bound to wonder if there isn't something Chinese about these films, if not in style, then in the issues that director Li and writer James Schamus have chosen from the writings of Annie Proulx and Rick Moody and Daniel Woodrell. Does the gay theme of Brokeback Mountain have anything to do with Taiwan? Since Nixon's adoption of the One China policy in 1972, which made China into the queer nation of Asia and the strongest supporter of gay rights in that part of the world. Does the American Civil War in any way reflect the tragic internecine rivalries that overcame China in the 1930s and 40s, and which eventually set Ang's family, or at least some of them, fleeing from Jiangxi province to Taiwan? Or is this too biographical an approach to an author's inspired creativity and broadly humane concerns? This is the question which I would like to ask Mr. Li for his response. Thank you.
Our third speaker will be Chien-hsin Tsai, Assistant Professor of Modern Chinese Society and Culture in the Department of Asian Studies at the University of Texas at Austin. He has co-edited Sinophone Studies, a critical reader, and is finishing a manuscript on loyalism and literature from colonial Taiwan. He will speak to us about Ang Lee's Taiwan.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chien-hsin Tsai. My talk today is about Ang Lee's Taiwan, but I would like to first start with a quote from Forrest Gump. Well, as we know, Forrest Gump loves his mother, and he takes her words to heart. She once told him, "Life was like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get." Well, keep this in mind and picture this. You're a chef at a cooking contest. You're given a basket of mystery ingredients. So you open the basket to find ingredients you may or may not know. It's like a coin toss, an equal chance of getting head or tail. And you're also given 30 minutes to transform these ingredients into something really tasty. But keep this in mind too. The judges, however, will have a bone to pick with you if you serve the head as is. So you scramble to make head cheese, and the judges love it. And you move on to the next round. And the judges then give you another basket of mystery ingredients for your entree. And then another one arrives for your dessert. So many of you know this is what the TV program Chopped is about. So when Chopped gives you lemon and you make lemonade, you will get chopped. You need to think outside the basket. You need to think outside the box. So directors and screenwriters think outside the box all the time, and Ang Lee here is no exception. And whether it's Jack in the Box, I mean Jack Twist in the box, or Jane Austen in the box, it matters very little to him. He's never failed to transform his ingredients into a feast for the eye. So we really see thoughtfulness in his presentation, in his direction, and this is his latest example from Life of Pi. In almost all of Ang Lee's movies, people eat, people drink, they fight at the dining table, but they also make up over food. Food is both the staple and the stapler. It nurtures people, it moves the plot, it also binds the characters, but more importantly, it makes sense of relationships that don't seem to make sense to many. So food, in a sense, is as much about social relations as about self-construction with regard to ethnicity and identity. So more simply put, the very makeup of life, or the very makeup of food, is the very makeup of life. Or as the Chinese people love to say, 民以食为天, in food we trust. Well, like American people, Taiwanese people look for occasions to get together to share food and life stories. Food tastes better when shared, and life stories more moving when there's an audience. Also like America, the United States, Taiwan has a long history of immigration that dates at least to the 17th century. Historians have told us a lot of fascinating stories about migrant settlers from the coastal provinces and how they moved from China to Taiwan. And anthropologists, such as Harvard's very own professor, James Watson, have also told us mouth-watering stories about these migrant settlers' culinary skills and dietary habits. New food traditions continue to be invented and reinvented. And during the process, sometimes old traditions are replaced. Defining what Taiwanese food is as difficult as defining what American food is. But as the United States and Taiwan continue to welcome new immigrants, we know the culinary evolution shows no sign of abating. Most Taiwanese people are descendants of Chinese immigrants. And in 1949, Taiwan saw a massive wave of immigration when the Nationalist Party led by Chiang Kai-shek was defeated by the Chinese Communist Party. And as soldiers and civilians settled in Taiwan in the late 1940s, they also drastically changed Taiwan's political, linguistic, cultural, as well as culinary landscapes. Once again, much like what the Japanese did when they ruled the island from 1895 to 1945. Mr. Chu here left on the poster, and Father Chef, the male protagonist in Ang Lee's Eat, Drink, Woman, Eat, Drink, Man, Woman, and Eat, Drink, Man, Woman, Man, Woman, 饮食男女, is one of the 1.2 million immigrants who moved to Taiwan in the late 1940s. His wife has passed away, leaving behind 3 daughters for him to care. And every week he cooks a big meal for the entire family. And as you can imagine, he's been doing this for 20 years or so, and the daughters, now all adults, have long become tired of this weekly ritual. And to make matters worse, the father has lost his sense of taste, so some of his dishes just don't taste right anymore. For a chef, losing the ability to taste means the end of his career. And for an immigrant like Mr. Chu, it means much more. Losing the ability to taste for Mr. Chu means losing a big part of his life, a big part of his memories that he will never be able to retrieve, he will never be able to evoke by way of food. And by way of extension, that means homecoming is no longer possible. Well, this is really a tasteful example of their weekly feast. You see the fire pot on the right, or the huoguo, the hot pot, is usually attributed to northern style cuisine. And the fish, it's called the squirrel fish. The fish is filleted and then deep fried. It looks like a squirrel, and hence the name. It comes from the Suzhou region in eastern China. And left to the fish, we have the hawk casserole, is a signature southern cuisine. So, all these examples, all these dishes are telling us so much about Taiwan's history of immigration without really saying a word. Now, I would like to show you a clip from near the end of Eat, Drink, Men, Women. And as you watch the clip, I hope you will pay attention to how the camera moves.
既然大家聚在一起能吃饭，就是缘分。
是啊，我们学院不是一家之亲，可也算是亲如一家。
既然是亲如一家，那就没什么话不能说的。我有几句话憋在心里很久了，我之所以不说，不是想故意隐瞒什么，我只是觉得不愿我个人的事情连累了家人，变成一种负担。其实一家人住在一个屋檐下，照样的可以各过各的日子。可是从心里产生那种顾忌，才是一家之所以为家的意义。其实我不说也没对不起谁，说了只是不想再委曲求全。我这一辈子怎么做也不能像做菜一样，把所有的材料都集中起来才下锅。当然，吃到嘴里是酸甜苦辣，各尝各的味道。哎，不说了，吃过饭再说吧。
爸，你到底要讲什么吗？
爸，你不说我们也知道了。
So, Ang Lee has found in food the words to express his character's deepest secrets and feelings. I must not spoil the movie for you. This is really a movie to watch on your own. But I can tell you this is where he lets the skeleton out of the closet and turn a somersault on the dining table. The camera, as you've probably noticed, moves counterclockwise, capturing what is happening in the dining room. It moves very much like a turntable, Lazy Susan. So, and this movement for me, this camera movement for me, symbolizes what it is to be restlessly human in today's restless world. And the world has been restless, in fact, tempestuous for Taiwanese men and women. Now, back to history. In 1895, Taiwan's connection to China was chopped. Taiwan was ceded to Japan. And in 1949, as I mentioned earlier, a big wave of immigration arrived in Taiwan. And then in 1971, I think, Taiwan, also known as the Republic of China, became a member in the United Nations. As descendants of immigrants, Taiwanese men and women have learned not to confine themselves to the particularities of these historical moments. They have learned to think outside the box and act outside the box. This, of course, doesn't mean that they're nonchalant about what the world is becoming. But this, for me, means that they're more plugged into the fundamental questions about human life. Oops. Well, food and cuisine evolve as immigrants carry on in life. It has somewhat become a trite remark that all good things must come to an end, or the Chinese love to say this: no banquets last forever, but life must go on. One thing we can be sure of is whenever life gives Taiwan and its people lemons, they make more than lemonade. And Father knows best. Well, he says, I cannot live my life like my methods of cooking. I can't wait until all the ingredients are prepared and then cook. By way of conclusion, I turn to yet another quotation, this time from The Tempest by Shakespeare. According to Shakespeare, we are such stuff as dreams are made on. And for the Chinese translator of this play, Yang Mu, who teaches at the University of Washington, Seattle, Taiwan and its people are such stuff as dreams are made on. And for me, because we can't live without food, food is such stuff as dreams, as memories and histories are made on. And I think both James Schamus and Eileen Lee know this perfectly well. And this is why these two men behind their globe become global figures. I really like this image because they all look very happy here. But in particular, I really like this because Diana Osana is holding her trophy on the one hand and reaching out for Ang Lee's on the other hand. So my question, I don't know if Ang Lee noticed this, but but my question for Ang Lee is, what was on your mind if you didn't notice that? So perhaps, Diana, get your hands off. This is mine, you have yours already. But at the end of the day, these two globally public figures return to being our very own private companions. And I think they're our boxes of chocolates, my comfort food. Thank you.
Our final speaker for this panel is Eugene Wang, a professor of Asian art at Harvard University, a Guggenheim Fellow. His numerous publications range from ancient to modern and contemporary Chinese art and cinema, and he's currently interested in studying how the mind is mapped onto matter. He will speak to us about what is the caution in lust caution.
So what is caution? Bad question. A good film is not to be reduced to a morality tale. We can draw the caution in the world if you want, such as, or the world or bedroom is a stage, or man and woman are mere players, or both grandstanding in the worldly stage and finding peace in the bedroom are equally self-delusion for the high-minded individuals, or patriarchal societies tend to victimize young women as sacrificial victims, and so on. The film is all about the above and none of the above. So, what does that leave us? You. It is really you that brings your own memory, your private experience, your in bedroom and in the world to the equation. In other words, you are part of the equation and you finish the thought that the film starts. But today, it's not about you. It's about An Li and his collaborator, James Schamus. So we have this rare chance to hear their last word. I know you're not coming here to hear me. So here's a caution. Let's not bark the wrong tree. Let's ask, in fact, not what the caution that the director and his screenwriter embed in the film, but ask how they did it. Indeed, how does a film director do his job? A film is a complex engine, the sum total of parts. Each does its own job, and they add up, and you have a film. If the film flops, you blame the actor. If the film succeeds, the director takes the credit. That's a very good job if you can have one. No, not quite that way. But the director's job is to make sure that the egos become small or work together. So the actors perform someone else's story and their own story, and they live with their bodies. They lie with their bodies, in fact, to get to the truth of the story. So let's relieve the director of the burden of explaining the intention of the film. And after all, as I said, the film has a mind of its own. The director is more of an assembler and not the only meaner and intender. Let's also unload the burden from Eileen Cheng-yin, the author of the original story. So much attention has been attributed to Eileen Cheng-yin to the extent I think James Schamus must have enough hearing that name one more time. In fact, if we were to play the hardball of attribution or source hunting, some credit actually should go to Stephen Song, who was educated in Beijing, Shanghai, and Hong Kong, and then moved to Hong Kong in 1949, and he directed the 1957 box office hit Battle of Love, and for which Eileen Cheng wrote the script. The film says much about their shared narrative interest in the battle of sexes. Incidentally, the Battle of Love was derived from a 1936 English play, which was made into a 1940 Paramount film. Drawing on his experience and memory of witnessing student organizations and their assassination attempts and activities during the Japanese occupation, Stephen Sohn supplied Eileen Cheng, not Eileen Zhou, Eileen Cheng is sitting there, supplied Eileen Cheng with the storyline of the luster quotient. In a letter to Cheng, Stephen Sohn even drew a map to diagram the assassination scene. Incidentally, Stephen Sohn's martial art work also inspired Ang Lee's Crouching Tiger. Now, James Schamus is to be really credited for not caring that much about the fuss of Eileen Cheng's original intention. The film, Ang Lee's film, their film, is better off unloading the Cheng burden, I think. Nor should we make much of the shaky historical parallels. Much is made out of the real historical event involving Zheng and Ding. Zheng Pingru, born from a Japanese mother and Chinese father, was a fashion magazine cover girl, and she joined the resistance movement and infiltrated into the circle of Japanese officials and Chinese collaborationists in order to assassinate Ding, one of the high-ranking collaborationists. The attempt failed. She was captured and eventually killed at the age of 23. There is indeed notable parallel between the historic event and the film narrative, but the two are not to be equated. However, some online scholars, self-appointed scholars, practice the entry-level art history in order to prove the connection. They note identical jackets by Ding and Ang Lee's male lead and conclude that the film is about Ding. Likewise, they note similar laugh lines and mouth shapes, as you can see here, and conclude that, in fact, the film is about Zheng. So this method is a travesty of my profession. Much is also made of Eileen Cheng and her ex-husband, Hu Lanchen, a high-profile collaborationist. As a man and woman, they each have their different qualities, dispositions, and presences. As a couple, they have different chemistry. Imagine if we use computer simulation, which the technology is available now, to let these two images act out the story and the film, and it would have been a different kind of film. They're not simply not Ang Lee's male and female lead. I'm content watching Tang and Lun dueling out the battle of sexes. The chemistry is just right there. Now imagine replacing Tang Wei with Zhang Zi, the film would have a different monster altogether. Zhang and Tony Lun did have their cinematic version of Battle of Sexes recently, and I leave you to judge its success or failure. We naturally want to know more about how Ang Lee chose his cast and coaxed drama out of his male and female lead. But this is a delicate matter that we need to handle gingerly. These two extraordinary actors act out a mind game with their bodies. The result is a series of psychologically charged bedroom scenes, which is the heart and soul of the film. The total of 10 minutes sex scenes took more than 100 gruesome hours to film. So exhausted was Ang Lee, the director, from shooting the scene, I don't think he wanted to relive his exhaustion today. We also need to respect the actor's privacy. what happened on the closed set stay at the closed set. Instead, I would imagine Ang Lee's directing method by turning to an indirect source, his teacher, Leonard de Koven, whose philosophy on acting and directing left a huge impact on Ang Lee's film career. Since this event takes place in a university setting, so I take this occasion to pay tribute to our own teaching profession, even though that sounds a little bit self-glorifying. So what did Ang Lee learn from her? Her bag of tricks include the following. Less is more, know your actors and actresses, give them minimum cues and let them run with them. Press the right button to release their own private demons or memories and let the genie out of the bottle. They will play out their own stories. And the total effect is better than anyone, God or Ang Lee, can anticipate. Since we're not asking how Ang Lee directed his male-female leads in Lust Caution, we can ask how he may direct any film with a similar plotline. This takes back to the film title. Eileen Cheng creatively plays on the word Jie. The man, the target of the woman's planned assassination, buys a diamond ring for her. This melts the woman's heart and triggers the game changer. The phrase normally actually recalls Buddhist precepts, rules and disciplines observed by Buddhist practitioners. Among these is the precept forbidding illicit or improper sexual behavior. The tension between Buddhist asceticism and carnal transgression remains a source of drama for thousands of years in China. The greatest Chinese love story, The Romance of the West Chamber, actually takes place in a Buddhist monastery. The oldest tale of sex and precept or lust caution was painted on the wall of a 5th century Chinese Buddhist cave. An elderly man sends his son to a Buddhist monastery to become a monk. One day, the abbot of the monastery sends the novice monk to beg food from a wealthy layman's household. Charmed by the handsome novice monk, the daughter of the household tries to seduce him. Wait a minute, says the monk. Let me have a moment by myself inside the house. After a while, the young woman breaks in, only to find the novice monk has committed suicide for fear of violating the Buddhist precepts. Now, James Schamus must be able to coax an intriguing film script out of this, turning on the question of what really happened. Did the monk, in fact, violate the precept and kill himself out of shame and guilt? Is the woman love-struck and now grief-stricken, lying and whitewashing the transgression and covering up the transgression? Well, that's James Schamus' problem, not mine. I'm interested in the casting here. So here's my final question for the director, Ang Lee. If you were to direct this hypothetical movie, how would you choose your cast? Whom would you pick as your young woman? Tang Wei one more time? Whom would you pick as your young monk? Christian Bale? Or Keanu Reeves? How would you direct them in playing this scene? Can you demonstrate a hypothetical session in which you instruct them? Well, I don't want to be too hard on you, so I'll give you a minute. In the meantime, since the director is probably tentative, so here's a chance for the audience. Whom would you nominate to play the female and male leads? Anyone? All right. And also, here's a chance. Any wannabe actors here? Here's an audition chance, in fact. Come on the stage and play the young monk and the young woman and let director Ang Lee direct you. And anyone volunteer? Okay, I'll let Ang Lee do his picking. Thank you.
ask the panelists for this panel to come on stage. Also, Ali and James Schamus to please come on stage, and then we will have we would take maybe 2 or 3 questions from the audience before we go to the next panel. But maybe before we have the audience Q&A, because a few of our panelists have posed questions and but also offered interpretations, and I would be interested to know if Ali and James Schamus, would you like to respond to any of the presentations that have been given at this point? Okay.
I wish those professors can talk all afternoon. Really interesting. It make me value my movie a lot more. Thank you. It actually means something. Those are keen observations. Thank you, and I very thank that you can articulate them. And I need to make a movie. We Chinese have a saying, 抛砖引玉, you throw a brick, try to elucidate. I think a good movie, I hope those should be not statement, but provocations to provoke better thoughts. I think this is evidence, like those images provoke and say those wonderful words. I think they're meaningful because when I make a movie, I really don't want to know what they are. James and I like sounding boards. What do you think? Which is basically, I have a dream. Of course, the dream comes from some internal reflection of my life somehow, and I don't really want to know why I was attracted to, Last Caution. I feel guilty for a long time for being attracted to that. Bad thing. For a long time, some of the movie like Last Caution, I resist them for a long time. Last Caution, I resist the thought, like that monk, for at least 3 years, like don't come to find me, and it just kept bothering me. And I pitched to James once, and James was like, do it. Let's do it. I'm not guilty. Imagine me, a nice guy, well brought up in Taiwan. I have to face 2 brilliant actors. One, like Virginal, her first movie, I chose out of 10,000 actresses reading. And you see her, it's like, yes, there's a movie. I can make the movie. Thank you, God. But I hate you, God. Why do you give me her? That I have to do this movie. And then there's Tony Leung, the best actor there is, I think, and very experienced, know what he's doing, taking the challenge, and they're naked in front of you, look up at me. What do? She knows she played me from the heart, and he knows he played my balls. They're like Adam and Eve. God, just tell me what you want. And that drives me crazy. I cry a lot making that movie. Actually, I really don't want to make that movie. I don't want to talk about it. It's like Eileen Cheng. I think those 30 pages took her 30 years to write. For a talent like her, she probably spent one afternoon write that short story, 30 pages. But she probably spent 30 years trying to hide the trace because she's so scared. And that movie really scared me. I don't know, I feel like the group karma of China for the modern history is haunting on me. Something, I have to do this devilish thing. A good girl has to play the bad girl to find out how bad it is down there. And I went really deep with the actors. I never went so deep with the actors. That's the deepest I went to. I told you, 2 great talents. One know what he's doing, the other don't know, and they look at you like totally innocent. We all give it to you. And at some point, I think Tony Leung tried to console me, said, Mr. Director, they won't call my name, Mr. Der-wei, you have to take care of yourself. We only expose our skins. You really have to. I was like this. Yeah, that was tough. Sometimes I don't want to share that secret. I think that belongs to me and the actor. It's very hard to open up to them and them to me. Those are precious moments. You have to keep it secretive. But I will say this, only through pretense you can find the truth. Because the real us is very hard. The one thing I think Lenore de Koven told me that I will remember is there is something going on, there is something really going on. So you have to learn to distrust text, what people say, and treat them like lies and try to figure out what's underneath. I think that's dramatists do. That's what I think movies should be doing. It's tough. I think filmmakers, artists, we're brave people, we're producers. But actors are even more brave than us. We're special species, like we're guinea pigs. I didn't really answer your question, is it? Well, no. Who do I cast? I don't know. I know when I see them. To be honest with you, making movie is no democracy. You know, I don't want anybody to vote. Just when I see, I know it, and you just have to trust me. For many years, James made me trustworthy. The first draft of Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, James wrote it. All the fight scene, he just wrote, "They fight," and we raised. And they put a caption in the beginning of the thing script and say, "To any investor, just trust me, and we'll stage the most brilliant fights ever." And that was it. Yeah, trust me, we'll try our best and see what we exposed. And Jerome, I don't remember what your question. You asked me a question about identity, something.
I think you've already answered it. And I might say from a teacher's point of view, my predecessor wouldn't let you defend your dissertation until you knew the answer. And if my students know the answer, I don't believe it. And so I don't think they're ready to defend until, like you, they're ready to discuss things that don't have simple answers. So I think you've been there before us.
Schamus, do you want to respond to any of the presentations?
Oh, no, I just want to say thank you. It's really fun being both an academic and hanging with this guy to actually have the benefit of kind of empathizing both from the stage and from the audience, and I just want to say a big thank you. I've been texting before today's event with my oldest daughter, who's a senior at Carleton College in Minnesota, who attended a similar event that we held together in Berkeley when she was actually looking at colleges to attend, and she came up with my nickname, which is now stuck and which she reminded me of again 5 minutes before we entered the room today, which is VFS, Vaguely Famous Sidekick. And so she just reminded me to act appropriately to my VFS status today.
But James is a smart guy. I'm the guinea pig.
Okay.
He's my corner man. I'm like a boxer. Go out, throw some punches, and see if I can hit something, and most likely getting hit. But he's the man who's the boxer. When you go around, stop doing this and that.
So we will have 10 minutes for audience Q&A, but keep in mind that there's going to be an extended conversation that Professor Eileen Chow is going to lead with Eileen and James Schamus afterwards. So if you have a more general question, then leave it for the second panel. And for now, it's more if you have questions about what has been presented so far to our panelists or to Eileen and James Schamus, please raise them. So we have about 10 minutes before we break for the second panel. Yes.
Just a little random question. Why there's no sequel? that movie is just fantastic. It keeps my personal mind, my childhood dreams, passion, and story is endless, beautiful story. And secondly, Brokeback Mountain is really the movie.
I believe all we love to see another movie in Crouching Tiger's, magnitude and imagination, the beauty. And second reaction is, movie is the great movie. I honestly carry some of the scholars, professors, detailed, very fascinating analysis. But I think a great movie, a great fans will know when they're in the movie theater. And it just touch you and move you, okay? And we're not only proud of you, Andy, and I'm from Taiwan too, 1 year older than you. And but your movie, watching you the earliest movie, that's really, because of our background, we know Chinese culture, deep culture. But then the following movies, I can kind of skip my credit. But Brokeback Mountain, I think you won the Best Picture, but you didn't. Okay, and that movie transcends sex, nationality, and humanity. It's just touch you. And you are great in expressing human relationship, human emotion, all those things. That's become the critics in the Hawk. But I just want to see more and more your great work in those dimensions, in those elements. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll collect a few more questions and then have the panelists answer them together. Yes. And please make your questions very short.
Okay.
Hi. Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, yes. Okay. Hi, Mr. Li and Mr. Schamus. I'm really happy to see the two of you today. So my question is for Mr. Li. The panelists examined the social concepts behind a lot of your movies, and they presented the scenes from your movies and tell us what they mean. Were there things that struck you as something that you even didn't think of when you were making the movie? Could you give us some examples, if there are? Thanks.
Would you like to respond to
I would like everybody to ask those scholars, because we have our sessions. Crouching Tiger, when I'm done with that movie, I'm done. It got out of my system. So I just let those movies get out of my system. I feel like I need to do them. So after Brokeback Mountain, I have different things, different subject matter I want to get into, different cinematic ambition, different territory, whether it's philosophical, socially, or personal. I just follow my instinct. Crouching Tiger, there were 10 years. I not only don't want to make a sequel of it, I think when the girls fly down the cliff, it's done. For many years, I pretend I will make a prequel of that movie. I even spent my own money, wrote scripts, location scouting, so people can see me. Yeah, but I was pretending. I was just, as long as I was making an attempt, nobody else would do it. So not only me can do it, at least for 10 years, nobody else can do it. Those movies pass through my, my system. I gotta get the, in Crouching Tiger, I A-graded B genre, which is Big Trouble, and I took something pulpy and to show the subtext of a race, a nation, a group of people, a culture. To me, it was sexual repression. Just in case you didn't notice, the phallic symbol that the woman is fighting for, the sword. So that was that for me, and I want to do it American way. That was the Hulk. To me, the repression was violence. It was the it was the subtext here, very heavy. I was surprised how heavy that is. So I want to deal with that. One is a great success. The other didn't find many audience. But I just feel I have this compelling need to make those movies. There are the subject matters I want to deal with in a cinematic way, because I don't know how else I can deal with those feelings that I want to express, or a curiosity I want to fulfill, to find out. A lot of curiosity. I think I'm an avid filmmaker. I just want to make different kind of movie, touch different cultures. And each time I thought I'd make a great leap away from myself. The diaspora feeling is certainly there, but to me it's more about avoiding to be nailed down what it is, because I don't really have that deep cultural root. I'm everywhere, so I try to avoid them. As a result, I have to identify, adapt to everything. But that's who I am. I want to be accepted. Only through movies I can do that. I'm very fortunate. I have the talent and the help I need to make those movies. Those are like me. I cannot tell you why I don't keep making certain type of movies. I don't want to stay there. I want to keep moving. It's a great fortune. You have friends like, and actually the ability to be your backbone, to keep pushing you and accepting you, however you become. I can find friends like this. I hope I can find audience alike share my growth, and they share theirs with me. I took it naturally, flow with the wave. I don't know what else to say.
I just need to make a quick correction. As usual, I get to correcting. More people saw The Hulk than Crouching Tiger in theaters. What was the question? Were you surprised?
Whether any of the comments from the panelists have touched on aspects of your movie that you haven't thought of?
No. But I could not articulate them. I could not make that much sense out of them. But certainly they touched upon, and they know how to make full sentences and paragraph to what appear to be nonsense to me, just something I feel. And of course, a movie, you have to rely on the structure, and then you have feeding boards like, tell you what to do, what not to do, and sometimes I listen, sometimes I don't. But yeah, those are the smart people who figure it out. Sometimes I put things in there people never find out, and then there are people who find out things I didn't intend to, but it make total sense, and I'm happy to take them in. Like I planned all this, but basically you start with a dream, an urge, and you get all the helps you can, and the rest is survival. How to make this work? I think Professor Tsai put it very well. It's like chopped and give it the ingredients and just survive to make the most out of it. I think that's all there is to me. I really cannot put that in simple ways of explanations. They're all true. I didn't hear anything today, honestly, that I say, well. But thank you.
Well, thank you. On that note, please join me in thanking the panelists and me. We're going to have a 10-minute break, and then before, or actually make it 15 minutes before we come back for the next session.
Now we are going to start the second panel of this symposium. In this panel, we are going to conduct it in a slightly different way. We are going to have a conversation between Ang Lee, James Schamus, and Professor Eileen Chow. Please allow me to say a few words about Eileen Chow, who will be hosting the conversation. She graduated from Harvard University, and she was my colleague for quite a period of time, but now she has been grabbed away by Duke University. So she's representing Duke here to preside over the conversation today. So, Eileen.
I think this is the anticipated segment of hearing James and An, if I may, speak. So I'll try to keep my comments fairly at a minimum, so just a few minutes, as a kind of setting a scene for what we might be discussing today. And so, and after about, I think about 30 minutes of conversation between James and An, I'd like to open the floor, or 30 or 40, and then maybe open the floor for a little bit of conversation. And since everybody has begun on a personal note, I thought maybe I should too. I actually met both of them 10 years ago at Yale at a conference, but I feel that my beholdenness to both of you has been much longer. Over dinner, you mentioned that when Wedding Banquet played at the Berlin Film Festival, and you heard people laugh, and you suddenly realized it was a funny film. And I think I realized that when I went to, I saw it actually as a kind of a premiere for the Asian community as well as the LGBT community in DC. I was working in DC at that time in 1993, and it was really funny. It was a theater that was with the middle aisle, and just two sides of seats. And strangely enough, it was this one side was the Asian people, the other side was the non-Asian people, and the community activists. And it was almost like a rhythmic difference in laughter. So one line, everybody laughs on this side, the other line, everybody laughs on and at that very moment, I understood the sort of the magic of An Li, right? So, and that it was really, that it was somehow deeply fulfilling for audiences from both sides of the aisle and many, many other, and that we could all speak a common language through his films. And I should say that I went with two non-Chinese community activists, a gay couple, and we couldn't decide which side we were going to sit, so it was very complicated. So today, since I think, I learned so much from the preceding panel. I thought Tina, Jerome, Chien-hsin, and Eugene elucidated so many interesting and brilliant insights in these films. And but I thought that one of the constant themes seemed to be that we would, in some ways, choose one film to talk about. And so today I will do that as well. But before I begin that, I want to thank, of course, Professor David Wang, Professor Jie Li. David and Jie had been working tirelessly to make this happen alongside their graduate students. And so really, really, this is wonderful. Thank you very much. And I also want to mention that the Harvard Film Archive, led by Hayden Guest, is running concurrently a film retrospective of all of An's films this weekend. And in fact, tonight, the first film will be Less Caution at 7 p.m. And Hayden has already warned me not to talk too much about Less Caution, and warning you guys as well, because he will be coming for the Q&A afterwards. So we're going to hold our horses on the really juicy sort of sex details, right? So yeah, so come to the HFA, watch it tonight, etc. But I thought that I was just going to speak a few minutes about the Wedding Banquet as a way of maybe grabbing a few words to talk about today, sojourners and sexuality and performance and cultural identity and geopolitics, et cetera, even though I have been warned, because last night at dinner, our director said, so what exactly is diasporic? So I'll try to keep those kinds of sort of Latinate words to a minimum. But I did want to begin with talking about this scholar named Paul Hsu, who's been forgotten. And he never really got a teaching job after he wrote his dissertation. But he worked with Robert Park of the Chicago School of Sociology. And Robert Park in the 1920s was famous for studying immigrants, right? And he studied immigrants and called them the marginal man. And so in some ways it was the psychopathology of immigrants, right? How they couldn't fit in and how helpless they felt, how trapped in a new land and having left behind an old land. And Paul Hsu was this student that he recruited who was actually literally a Chinese laundryman, because he wanted a native informant to go into Chinatown in Chicago to look at, to interview people for his larger immigrant project. But Paul Hsu wrote a very obscure article that was then forgotten called The Sojourner. And The Sojourner, he said, and he argued against his professor, pretty brave of him, and said that he didn't think that the status or the sort of state of mind that is being an immigrant is actually a negative one, right? but rather that instead of seeing it as a helpless victim who is not quite assimilated enough, which is a earlier 20th century notion of immigration, but rather as a sojourner who makes certain sacrifices, certain choices, but whatever is lost is also gained. And as well as not a helpless victim of being trapped between two cultures, but rather making a conscious decision to holding on to parts of his or her old culture that made sense, right? And trying to bring it into the new land through rituals, traditions, family members, etc. And when I came across the Sojourner essay, of course it seems very familiar for those of us who work in diaspora or these kinds of things now, but for someone to write that in the 1920s and 30s, right, was quite interesting, and it made me think of An Li's films, very much so. And this notion of both being between and in flight, but also not quite helpless or being trapped into being defined by other people, but actually having some agency and some ability to have a conversation about what we might call ourselves. And it also reminded me of Wayne Wang's Chan is Missing, a 1982 film in which one of the characters says, "What kind of Chinese are you?" Because there was, if you've seen the film, but sort of Taiwanese, mainland Chinese, et cetera, et cetera. But then later on in the film, the same character says, and this is in 1982, he says, "Identity shit, man, that's just such old news." So, and I think that is actually a sentiment that I think An Li and James Schamus's collaboration has conveyed very, very well. Identity shit is probably old news, but somehow it still surfaces, it's still interesting, it's still compelling. I was actually very moved by our first questioner, the gentleman who said the films moved him, and I think this is a very common response in sort of larger cultural China to a lot of An's films. And so maybe there is something really interesting there. So, about the wedding banquet, a couple of things. Now, of course, in the history of America, miscegenation or interracial, interethnic romance is fraught with awkwardness and actually illegality, right? And in fact, the illegality turned it from turn sex acts into race acts, right? And so that to date someone is to make a certain kind of political gesture, and sometimes a gesture that is outside the law. And I always really like the line in Wedding Banquet when, of course, Wei Tong's mother is always setting him up on these various dates. And by the way, it's a brilliant script. I just really love that script. But and when and then when the date falls apart, this blind date falls apart, the blind date says, "Well, don't worry, my mom did it for sign up me too. Just like you, I had a white boyfriend." So, and it's this kind of recognition that identity, rather than being fixed or static or something that you're trapped in, is probably a little bit of there's a bit of flexibility and as well as a little bit of a choice and a little bit of performance and playfulness. I really liked what An just said about, it's really in the lies that you tell, that you learn the truth, and that's really through kind of performance, a performative value that you might get at something, right? That's not just in the words. And even the name Wei Tong, who is the character, I don't think you necessarily meant this, but of course he is falsely alike, right? He is living a lie, trying to, in the closet, but he and Wei Wei are living false marriage, and he's lying to his parents, and his name, Wei Tong. And so, little details about, what's going on, what is the performance. And I think that another thing that the film really touches upon is the centrality of the relationship between fathers and sons in Chinese culture. And I think it's no coincidence that your first trilogy is what we now call the father trilogy, I suppose, Father Knows Best trilogy. And but that awkwardness is both out of a kind of genuine filiality, but actually also political opportunism, right? That you can always be commanded to do things by fathers. And I think that for, my mother is also a principal, so I understand the pressures of growing up with educators, that I thought that An Li really explored that in these first films, Pushing Hands, Wedding Banquet, and Eat, Drink, Man, Woman. Another thing that's really interesting about looking at that is that if you think about Wedding Banquet, I think that the sort of shock of Wedding Banquet when it exploded on the scene as if it emerged from the head of Zeus, that it was a different kind of film from Taiwan, right? It was neither the very you can say high formalist mode of Taiwan new cinema, but it wasn't just a kind of rom-com or a genre film, but it kept on having it had a lot of flavor. It had a lot of layers of flavor and a lot of aftertastes. And I think that that's something that really captures, and I would love to hear more about how you guys think about that. But for me, what's interesting about the film is that on the surface it's actually fairly culturally conservative, and I'm sure you've heard critics tell you that, in some ways it kind of upholds both patriarchy as well as a Chinese cultural tradition, because in the end everybody kind of makes do for the child to be born, right? But I think that one thing that I find in all of An Li's works is that even though on the surface maybe the storyline is a tad conservative, maybe even conventional in terms of how the story is resolved, visually it tells a wholly different story. And one of the things I noticed about the film, and I think Chien-hsin was noticing about the film he was speaking, is that people are constantly dancing in the film. It's almost like a musical just without music. So instead of a pas de deux or pas de trois, it's a pas de cinq, right? So these 5 characters are constantly floating in and out of the frame and kind of breaching the frame when 2 other people are talking. And there are many, many instances of that. And it made me really think about how the film presented performance as a kind of identity and a kind of falsity, but in acting it, certain things happen, right? Certain things develop. And even though every set of characters in the film is making kind of a performance or lying to another set of people in the film, I think that it means that so on the kind of cultural level or narrative level, the film is telling one story, but on the representational level, in the diegetic space of the film, all sorts of interesting stuff is going on, and all sorts of sort of comfortable cultural conclusions are in fact overturned. And I think that that is something that is a kind of consistent, I wouldn't say technique, but really heart and soul of a lot of his films. And so that the family, which stays intact at the end, nobody's really happy, and nobody's really unhappy, but everybody decides that it can go on. And I think that's that maintenance, that kind of fragile maintenance, and the fragility of a family and its maintenance takes both, I think maybe I'm plagiarizing this from you, James, but that it, from a kind of very standard Cavelian comedy of remarriage, and elevates it to this larger discussion of culture as well. And so kind of fulfilling nostalgia, but by circumventing geopolitical dictates, right? And so I just want to say one last thing, which is I think a lot of An Li's films end in flight and metamorphosis. And I was sad to hear that the final leap down the cliff also meant the possibility of no sequels. But I think that there's a kind of visual transformation if you think about the Hulk, and in some ways the greenness of the Hulk is a kind of Shakespearean green world. Even the coins being tossed in the sky and sensibility, the sort of the reflective surface of the ice storm, as if it were kind of just mirrors and a sort of irreality in the film itself. All these things, I feel like they always deal visually with something irresolvable in the plot. And similarly, I think Wedding Banquet ends with such a flight. It's a film about marriages fake and real, about America and Taiwan, about New York, about urban spaces, about fathers and sons, elaborate pretenses. But my favorite scene, so I asked you to include it in the trailer, but is actually something that James wrote in the script, right? The final lines of the script is, as they walk through the security gates, Mr. Gao is briefly frisked by an attendant with a handheld metal detector. He lifts his hands as if in awkward flight. And it is this kind of image of awkward flight that I think really defines what is visually resolved that is completely irresolvable in the real world, in the film world. And so with that, I just wanted to open the floor by maybe asking them to speak about the films themselves. But.
Thank you.
Should I begin with a question? Okay, I should say that, every great duo, Batman Robin, Butch Cassidy Sundance Kid, Bogey Bacall, there's an origin story, right? There's always going to be a moment like, how did they become the dynamic duo? And maybe a lot of people know the story, maybe they don't, but I would love to hear a little bit about the coming together of the superhero duo that is James Schamus and An Li.
January 91, I got Taiwanese money, Pushing Hands, got the best screenplay in the competition. And then the government found me for about $400,000 to make that movie. It was written to be made in New York, but it's meant to be made for Taiwanese audience, the mainstream audience. I didn't know if I can make that movie with that little money. Through a mutual friend of ours, I was looking for a producer. The person introduced me, actually Ted Hope before James, Ted Hope.
He says hi, by the way.
He said when I was a PA, Ted was the key PA. Now he's want to be a producer. Let's check it out. So there I saw Ted and James, 2 tables. They said, what's your story? I want to make it short. I pitched my story. James, I couldn't pitch out of the basket. I'm the worst pitcher. It took me 45 minutes to tell the story. It doesn't really make sense. But he said I was describing the movie. And they pitched themselves to us. They said we're the king of no-budget filmmaking in New York. So we happily rounded up that meeting. All the time I was just hoping these 2 are not crooks that won't take my money.
So your bad pitching didn't hurt you? Or did it?
You know what I said to Ted really was that. I mean, it was actually horrific, and because it was literally. And then she opens the door, and she sees him across the room. He's standing there, thinking, and literally, pitching is supposed to be like 5-10 minutes. They're supposed to get up out of their chair, all the except. But I said to Ted, at the end, that was really one of the worst professional experiences I've ever had. But this guy actually was describing a movie. He wasn't even telling a story. It was literally, he was actually, you could tell, and as we later learned, he'd spent about 5 years since winning all those awards at NYU for that amazing short film in his underwear cooking in an 800 square foot condo in White Plains for his kids. So, because we were like, wow, it's Ang Lee, what's been going on? And that was what was going on. So he's spent basically that 5 years in an 800 square foot condo shot listing this movie in his head. And so you could tell that this was a filmmaker. And trust me, there's a lot of people who do great pitches who you don't want even doing your bar mitzvah video. It's just like, stay away. So that was fun. I mean, it was great. And we actually started, we shot Ang's first film, Pushing Hands, in New York at a time of the studio lockout of the Teamsters. There's a big union war going on. Very difficult to shoot in Manhattan at that time. The Teamsters would roll around. If they saw anybody shooting, they'd get out and beat people up and destroy equipment.
Oh, great.
And because it was brutal. The studios it was a real brutal labor war. And but we were actually able to go out to, remember, you didn't come with us. Oh, you didn't go, yeah, that's right. To Lake Success, New York, in Long Island, where we met Tommy O'Donnell Jr., who was the head of the Teamsters. Then he was, Tommy O'Donnell Sr. had been the head of the Teamsters before him. I wonder. So, and he was great. It turns out he has a doctorate in sociology and was like the coolest guy I'd met in the film business a long time. And he gave us a Teamster at a flat rate.
I was going to tell you, I thought you were going to say you brought a suitcase of unmarked bills. No?
Yeah, no, it was a great conversation. He said, look, you guys are trying to make movies. We'll put a Teamster on and we'll put them on a flat rate. And I said, and then of course I was kind of, thought, okay, it's time for some jokes now. And I remember saying to him, oh, well, do you, it's a Chinese movie. You don't happen to have a Chinese-speaking Teamster. And he goes, no, I'll give you Tommy Levy. And I was like, oh, Jewish. And he just turned to me and goes, Leavey. It took Spike Lee to kind of get the Teamsters a little color there, later on.
Jumping very to your latest success, Life of Pi, a brilliant film, and of course Ang Lee won the Best Director Oscars for it. I did notice that it was a very wonderful and elegant acceptance speech as per usual, but it was really interesting that you thanked the Taiwan government, and when this was broadcast in mainland China, that part was cut out. I don't know if you know that, right? But that line in which you thank the Taiwan government is cut out. But so I wondered, there's been so much discussion about sort of geopolitics in some ways dictating filmmaking. There's been a lot of reorganization, filmmaking. A lot of Iron Man 3 has the only for China edition versus the rest of the world edition. Studios trying to think about how to craft their films to suit that market. So I was wondering, especially as someone who, is very important to that market. I mean, how do you think about this as a factor?
For me, for a long time make movie for the world, and China is a big part of that world. I think pretty soon they're going to surpass America and be the biggest. So you have to pay attention. I think the most important thing, make long story short, you have to keep feeding them materials, no matter how it happens. Just keep it alive. I think it will change. It will open up. You can't not expect things to change overnight. It's all the reasons and intertwined. It's very complicated. It's not one man's decision. It's not one department. It's not even one cultural phenomenon. It's a history. There's a social structure, infrastructure built into it. But I think it's important. People like you come out. Watch the world. I know there's censorship, but I know people also watch the uncensored somehow. You just have to keep doing it, and collaborate with the government or the system or commercial system. Keep communicating with the audience there, getting feedback, learn from it, because this is a very important part of the world. And sooner or later, it's gonna change.
Just respectfully point out that at the Oscars, when directors and producers get on stage, they invariably thank the head of the studio. And that's the asshole who probably censored and edited their movie by 10 to 20 minutes themselves. And we just think, we don't even notice that.
Right. So.
Our artists do that throughout history. You always.
I never did that.
You don't always. You always hide your meanings. You also work with censorship one way or another. When I make a movie in China, people always ask me, "Oh, did you get all the freedom to do this, do that?" Especially here in the States, and I will say, the most unfree. If I get really irritated, asked too many times, I will say, the most unfree place to make movies is actually the States, right here. But of course, it's not political pressure, but it's the commercial pressure, studio bureaucracy, what they think the audience want, and culture. This movie is very much established in American ways. Just numerous amount of rules in film language itself. You have to express a certain way, otherwise people don't understand. It's the very established you have to break. And to me, that's probably harder to deal with than the Chinese government.
In some ways,
it helped.
I mean, in some ways, what's really struck me is the soft pressure, right? So like Iron Man 3. So it's not about actually you're doing a politically sensitive topic and therefore you have to cut something out, but rather I need to include 5 more minutes of this Chinese star to get a better box office, right? So changing but how about from Taiwan? I mean, I know you're like a national treasure in Taiwan. I'm also from Taiwan. I wonder if there is, is that a good thing or a bad thing to be basically, a mega celebrity and also seen as, the national stage?
I can do whatever I want. And I just want, and people want to give it to me. So yeah, that's great. But it's also a burden. I feel I'm obliged. Part of the reason you make movies is you break away. You want to be free. You want to express. You want to be the opposite of something instead of work alone with something. But all those goodwills become a burden to me. It made me want to be a good man rather than a rebellious kid in making movies. So imagine when I present a movie like, I cannot do anything bad. Sometimes I want to, like Last Caution is a really bad thing to do to make that movie. Imagine when I present that, I was literally shaking. I was so afraid that when people see that, all those people who love me see that movie, what are they gonna make of me? And yeah, I got to do anything. I got a NC-17 here, but there, similar to an R-rated movie without censorship in Asia. Then the rest of Asia, pretty much except China, they followed, and Hong Kong follows. Even Philippines, a Catholic country, follow, because our government do that. They find excuses why should be okay, not restricted. They find reason to explain why I do certain thing that's artistic, that's like higher cost than watch naked people touching each other.
I actually saw
they find reasons.
I saw it in a packed house in Taipei, and no tomatoes were thrown. So.
So it has a lot of convenience, but it's lots of love. But it's also burden. But that's a high-class problem.
No. Then I guess maybe more personally, since you have talked a lot about family, and actually every woman I know swoons at the things you've said about your wife, and kind of almost a picture of connubial bliss, and the way in which she supported your career. And but I've also read a quote in which you said that you're very attracted to sort of the coming together and coming apart of families, right? Sort of family as a central theme. Families not necessarily by blood. So wondering how that kind of, and to speak personally, actually, when we were at Yale, one of the things that most impressed me about you was we were all talking, or maybe he was just trying to avoid us, but we were all talking for a long time, and suddenly you looked at your watch and you said, oh, it's this time, and I always call my father at this time every week. And I was, in that kind of genuine filiality, rather than a kind of just a performance of it, right? So if you wanted to elaborate on that kind of theme in your films.
Performance is part of the relationship, even sex is performance. I demonstrated in that movie. What else is not performance? Just the way, even you call your father's the same, your mother's name, repeatedly, same thing, same weeks after weeks, same thing. But just the way you show enthusiasm, that makes it work. Family is important. I see family, particularly the father figure, as extension of a patriarchal society. I think through father and family, I really examined something we used to believe, but begin not to. It's the filial piety, is the Chinese architecture, structure of history that comes to Taiwan in my case. How do we deal with that? It's going through change because the West, tied from the West, the modernization. It's awkward. How do everybody functions? You talk about meanings, but what I really face that they don't really make sense. We try to pile up the sense, like wedding banquet. It's absurd. It's a fake wedding, but all the projection of everybody's emotions is real. It's really an examination of that. I think that when it comes to family, I'm really examining where is our culture or society coming from China to Taiwan. How do they survive? Where do we go from here? All those things. And James, of course, provide a different perspective. And I think those additional writings or writing themselves really help those movies stand. I couldn't do it by myself. This is James, there's other people who helped me. But it comes from my living experiences.
I don't know if James wanted to say anything more about the process of collaboration. Another fascinating, is also working in different languages, right? Producing, I assume you haven't learned Chinese
we
yet.
lack of good writers. James is a good writer.
But you haven't learned Mandarin since, right? You haven't learned Mandarin since I last saw you.
I have not learned Mandarin since, and I've forgotten half the French I knew back then already too.
So I was curious about that process of then writing a script that is, say, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, or.
Part of it is throwing yourself in there as from a standpoint of total ignorance, but with an allegiance to a sense of the vision is going to be, and a sense also of trying to throw down risk and trying to throw down, almost like a game for Ang. Is this risk worth taking? Is this storyline, if we blow it up here, is this a place that you can stare down and get through to the end of? And so, to me, it's an extremely instrumental process, the writing process. It's part of the filmmaking process. It's not as if I'm there to write some work of art myself. So dialogue tends to end up being written in what I call the international subtitle style, which then, as I learn over time, when you go back into Chinese, finds its way into a much more, because a much more articulated and poetic voice. I've come to appreciate Ang's linguistic Chinese skills over the years as an amateur, watching how the stuff comes back to me. It's almost as if I get to live professionally the world's most perverse Google Translate ever. And just because I'll write it and then it'll get translated, and then of course I'll have it translated back just to see what happened. And it really is, it's astonishing sometimes. And sometimes that translation back leads to certain moments of discussion, and maybe not, but in general it works. So I get to have that ghost-like experience of seeing the movie that Americans see, and seeing it from here, but also seeing the shadow of it, knowing that there are all these kind of whispers and voices and other ideas that I'll never know. So, a perfect example was reading the New York Times review of Lust Caution, which begins with a description of that excruciatingly boring mahjong scene. And, there's a moment, and I usually don't get it high and mighty, as Ang knows, where you just go, God, are we freaking stupid or what? How stupid can you be? And that voice of culture, that sense of ownership that movies have, and this is where I actually bridle a little bit. Oh, universal movies travel all the world. I'm like, think to myself, no, wrong, stop. You can have that. I think movies provide the idea that you are sharing a universal experience. Yes. They provide the fiction of that. But what Ang has taught me is, of course, that underneath that fiction are 20 other realities. And so, in a way, the cinema, unlike a lot of other media where translation is a big issue, and translation theory is, I think, as big here at Harvard as it is at Columbia, and we can get into translation theory, but cinema provides the absolute simulacrum of this belief in the universal transnational transportability of culture, when in fact it allows people who sometimes write for the New York Times to pretend that they can adjudicate culturally objects that literally are completely abstracted away. Name names. No, it just happens. We all make mistakes. By the way, I passed on some great script, whatever. But the point is, that's a rare moment, honestly. Usually I'd like, all right, whatever, fine. So it was a bad hair day. I get to review it. But, you understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
Very odd.
Absolutely.
That's an odd way to think of culture. If you think of the most profound emotional moments you've ever experienced in the culture these days, tends to be cinematic as opposed to textual. And if you understand at that moment that you're literally experiencing a simulacrum of a culture that you probably don't have any idea what it is. And I find that, frankly, I think it holds just as much for Chinese speakers as it does for English speakers in so many different ways, even with Ang's films. A lot of times there's these misjudgments and misvalues that go in. I know we're not supposed to assert intentionality. I'm not even speaking of that. Obviously, if Ang intended to say something, he would just pick up the phone and say it, whatever. Not go to all this trouble and torture people like me and all his other, his actors and everybody else to do whatever he's doing. But to a certain extent, that creating that space where you believe that you're getting this is one of the great mysteries of kind of capitalist cultural production, the way how it moves across borders.
Not translation theory, but one of a poem from the earliest poem collection in Chinese history, Book of Songs. She threw me a quince. I threw back in requital. I threw back a gem, not as requital, but meaning I will love her forever. And this notion of a kind of very unequal trade in translation, right? You toss my culture, I toss your culture back. You gave me a piece of fruit. I give you jewelry, but yeah, it still contains within it something genuine and something actually transmuted. I don't know if that's a more positive way of thinking about translation, but I did want to say, what was the most ridiculous linguistic misunderstanding between you two working on a script together? Or cultural misunderstanding?
Well, no, the draft I did of Crouching Tiger was, the way I describe it, because literally I went over there and people were looking at me so funny, like, like, what? Like, and it was, I described it after I kind of went through it as if some Chinese guy had written a Western, and, the cowboy comes into town, the lone gunman gets off his horse and kowtows to the sheriff, like 4 times. It's like, yeah, that's what he'd do, right? Yeah, it's like, whatever, I think there were like pages and pages of that, so, yeah.
But I do want to say, as inconvenient as is, because there's another way, because you never learn Chinese. Even if you learn, it won't be as good as how it's required to write a screenplay. But I do find there's a goodness in this inconvenience, whether we're doing Chinese or doing English text, which is, I'm in a disadvantage, is that this kind of different culture back and forth, the awkwardness. You find the awkwardness is not as from translation, it's the cultural background, the differences of how people reason. Every language, like Chinese is a figure. I think that makes us natural filmmakers. It's figurative. And this is a spelling. And it's like one side of your friend versus the other side of the friend. You're developing, you're bouncing off, actually you develop the whole head. I think for a person who's different from the culture you're portraying, there are two things you're interested in. One is it's big enough, it's fascinating. There are things that's important to us, might be boring to him. He doesn't want to see it. It's not fascinating. The other is reasons. If it's Chinese, we can say something. They're like, what? They don't get it. You have to explain and get it. It's just making appreciate my idea, or vice versa. You have to go to this wall of reasoning and fascinating. That's eventually what movie does. When you make a global movie, something transcends your culture. That's what you need. You want people to get it. For example, Last Caution, he reminded me if we call the resistance, if you call Bureau of Experience, which is totally normal to us Chinese, because Chiang Kai-shek, the resistance is a bigger proportion to the war. It's in Chongqing, Sichuan, that's a bigger part, that's the official. The collaborator is a smaller part. But if you use official in the resistance, people get confused here. They think resistance is supposed to be guerrillas and stuff. So cultural difference like this, there's no wonder why in the first stage of Crouching Tiger looks like a joke, because I took the part. Martial art fiction is really pulpy. It doesn't really make, it's crap, basically. It doesn't make sense. It's pulpy.
Feeling all tense now.
And you pick some things I'm interested in, I pitch it in fervently, it sounds like ridiculous. It doesn't make sense. So in making him or anybody work with me, now they can make the same. I have to explain. I'm going through a process of examining what I took for granted. There are a lot of nonsense we believe because we habitually believe in it. We live on it. Now you're making a movie for the whole world. You have to articulate it, you have to rationalize it, and you have to do the best of the best to make interest to them, and have to make sense, global sense. I think that although as comes out as they go back and forth, actually we create something not unique, but I think through James I appreciate my own culture a lot more.
So if I could ask a question about another kind of translation, I think of you as a kind of master visual storyteller, and that's something that people walk away from your films always remembering, arresting images and the way the images are telling a kind of story that perhaps, and I think Jerome elucidates that for us too. I feel like Hulk is the most underrated film, a superhero film. But one of the things that I found...
I'd say taking Woodstock myself.
I plead the fifth. No, I would say that one of the things that's immediately arresting in The Hulk is actually your translation of the graphic novel medium, the comics medium, right? Obviously, you're using it in the titles, and now it's become almost something you see, like in Kick-Ass and a lot of the Avengers stories. But But I think you were really the first person I saw doing that, taking something about the kind of, the sort of comics universe, comic sensibility, the meaning in the gutter, and then putting it onto this live action film. And not just in the credits, but actually in a lot of the editing. And so I don't know if this was very, very deliberate. This is something that, you thought a lot about.
Yeah, I guess we pull off Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon in Chinese. I thought I could pull off in English too. It's proven to be a lot harder. James, you want to fill in the whole story?
I think one of the most interesting things about that is that while you remember that aspect of the Hulk as a visual, something very visually stunning and original, and it is, to me, one of the most interesting things about that was the sound work. Because when you have multiple panels moving and there's all kinds of stuff happening in these, Ang and Tim Squires, the editor, and who really helps with the sound editing, and the sound team, who are amazing, who finally are starting to get Oscars after all these years. A lot of times the New York sound guys no one votes for the New York sound guys. Now they're starting to get some recognition. And but what was interesting to me was watching the way in which Ang directed your vision in this very highly densely populated and ever-shifting visual field with very subtle audio cues. Mm-hmm. And so I thought that was a really, that yes, we always think of cinema as a visual medium, but that was a very good reminder to me that it's what you don't see that often is what you see.
Right. No, that's a wonderful way of putting it. I was thinking how important sound is actually in Life of Pi as well. I mean, every scene in which you're visually directed actually by the sound. But speaking of Hulk, I did recently read in Frank DiGiacomo did a piece on you, and he called you the Bruce Banner of filmmaking, indie filmmaking in the U.S. And it goes without saying that James, via your both Good Machine and Focus, have basically every film that you've seen that's not a popcorn movie, that's won an award or that has captured us in some way, was produced by you. And so I wonder what you, and I think that in some ways, I'm sure An Lee's talent would have shown in any venue, but you made his films what they were when he was starting out. So I was just wondering, what is that producer role? Like, what do you think is that you're bringing into the Batman-Robin relationship?
For Ang, it's very, very specific, and it changes over time. And it really has, I would say, for Ang, I always think of it mainly as the guy who sets the table and tries to get the ingredients in front of him. So in some ways, my role over the years, for other reasons, I just become less on set, less really, we don't really even talk, we'll talk very philosophically and very fundamentally about why we're making a movie and what Ang is trying to reach for, and we have very specific problems, some of them technical, some of them emotional and philosophical, that we have to work through. I have to help him work through, let's put it that way. And alongside of that, David Lee and myself really, at the end of the day, what we have to do is try to figure out how to make sure that it's as frictionless a machine and a human and mechanical machine combination as possible. Once those big questions have been answered, or even if they're not answered, that we give the chance to answer them when he's going through the experience of making the movie. Otherwise, it's not worth it. So it's not really about helping craft a product after a while. I tend to think of Ang's movies now as one long movie with a lot of different acts. Don't really know where they'll go, but they all kind of blend together. It was fun seeing the reel you guys put together, because it's like, yeah, it's like a movie, and some of them, during some of them, it seems like more people are going for the bathroom break, and then other ones, there's more people banging down the door for that part of it, but it's all one. Yeah.
And I think that actually over dinner last night, An was talking about also that he now sees his work actually as part of a larger picture. But I don't know how willing you are to speak a little bit about your new project. I know that it has been mentioned, and I'm sure a lot of people are curious, but I don't know if that's something that you want to talk about at all.
Well, I'm reluctant talking because I don't quite know what it is yet, exactly, and technically it has a lot of difficulties. I'm going to do the Ali Frazier fight in the 60s and 70s through their different perspectives. That's what I'm into now. I think it's an ambitious one. I'm very excited about it. James is here helping, not the studio, but I think James just remind me it is true that sometimes the biggest help is to help me figure out, just at least somebody to talk to. What is it about? What is it? How do you articulate that? Something abstract, philosophy. God in pain. What is God? And James is a great thinker. He teaches philosophy, so it's a good person to talk to. And I think we're both crafted filmmaker. We're all seasons. Once you know what you're after, then we can do it really quickly. We're pretty seasoned, I would say. But to figure out exactly what is that taste, what is you're after, what is the ambition, something abstract. I think that you do need a companion.
Do you start from an idea or an image? The first germination?
It happened both ways. For example, the ice storm. And James told me, I remember, this is a young writer, Rick Moody. He's a pretty interesting writer. So there's a second book I read, not even for a movie. Obviously, it doesn't look like a movie. But I still remember page 200, when the kids are sliding down on the ice and get electrocuted. And I just have that picture in my head. I have to make this movie. Crouching Tiger is because of the image. When I read the story, the pulpy fiction, the martial art fictions, when the girl flying down, actually she escaped because she had that vaulting skill. Whatever. I just see the picture and I feel like making the movie. And usually that happens toward the end. I try to figure out what do I have to do to give the audience the feeling. I track backwards. What do I have to do along the way to get that taste in my mouth when I read it? I want to make it into the movie so people can feel the same way. That happens. Sometimes it's picture-driven, sometimes thematic-driven.
I think I read somewhere that the way that James can get you to make a movie is by telling you it's unfilmable.
Yeah, but he's now beats me to the punch since he only chooses movies that are unfilmable even before I can even get there. I mean this one, think of Joe Frazier's Left Hook, and think of 3D, and think of trying to actually film that alone. So, how do we deal with this? Well, I send Ang selections from Theodore Adorno on sports and capitalism. So somehow that's going to help him figure it out. Or God in Pain is, I send him Slavoj Žižek essays on religion.
Your personal professor.
Yeah, and none of this will ever make its way into the film. It's just a way of stunning him into attention.
Attention or soporific?
It's the same thing with him, as you've noticed.
Yeah. I thought that maybe I would end with a question that actually you kind of gestured at earlier when you were speaking, that sort of the idea of finding what you were saying, the unknown truth of being a human. So a kind of searching for God, but not God in an organized religious sense. And obviously this drives Life of Pi. So I was just wondering, do you feel this is a new turn? Or do you feel like, I know that you said your new film also stems from this impulse, but I was just wondering if this is a new turn.
Yeah, it feels like it. Mm-hmm. Maybe in 3 years from now, I don't think about that anymore. I don't know. But I'm thinking about that now, yes.
And do you feel like that it's from the process of making Life of Pi, or?
Yes, I would think so. I think I read Life of Pi when it first came out. It didn't do anything much for me. I know it's unfilmable. So put aside, I was never. And then when the 20th Century Fox just keep pushing me, they even wait for me during we were making that Woodstock movie. They're still waiting. And I think at some point I was just ready to take that in, to deal with that in life. Mm-hmm. Making movies, I don't think so much as a product, but it's just the way I learn about life and myself, and just like discovery. I'm very fortunate I get to do that. So I think somehow I thought maybe with another dimension I can do this movie. It turns out to be 3D. I didn't even know what 3D was. James encouraged me to watch one of his 3D cartoons.
Oh. It's not a cartoon. I was making Coraline.
Coraline.
Coraline. Come on.
So another dimension. I don't know what it is, but when I get into it, it just makes me think things differently. You know, what movie is? Why is it flat? Why do we believe in compensating with the lack of dimension? All those things, and those thinkings took me away from my usual habit. So the unmakeable becomes makeable, not just technically, just the different dimension of thinking. Unusual, I like break new established modes and stuff. And in one way, I'm the very docile person. Wherever there's rule, I follow, I obey. I'm like Joe Frazier. On the other hand, I'm like Ali. I don't want to do it. I want to be different.
Does that make James Ali? No.
Yeah.
The roles changes, changeable.
Okay.
Or like the Lost Twin Brothers. Roles are changeable. Yeah.
Well, I'd say Herbert Muhammad.
I do feel that, my personal opinion, and as I mentioned to you yesterday, is that I do think that the film Life of Pi is so much richer than the book. No offense to the book, but that you add all these interesting dimensions to it. But I thought we'd open
that part of the tape will be censored in Canada.
I know. So, I was wondering if we can open the floor for 15 minutes of questions. Maybe we should would you guys like to gather questions or just?
No, we can.
Okay,
whatever.
Okay, sure. Do you need a microphone?
Oh, there's a person with a mic. Okay.
Person with a mic running around. So, and actually in this space, I should say that later I was hoping if, since this is a kind of narrow passage, if we could let James and An walk out first rather than mob them in this passageway. So that would be much appreciated. So if the audience could wait till they left first. But.
Okay.
Okay.
Hi. First of all, I want to say thank you to Mr. Li because in my interview with the NYU film production program this spring, I actually talked about some directors that have influenced me the most, and I talked about Kieslowski and Mr. Li, and then I got in. So if I feel like it's like you write a perfect reference letter.
I'm sorry you didn't get into Columbia.
I didn't. And then I finally ended up with AFI. So, but actually, I just skipped my class this morning and flew here to attend this conference because I'm just a huge fan of Mr. Li's films. And my question is more kind of technical because of my filmmaking background. Because from the biography that I read a year before, I discovered that you actually, when you talk about your education at NYU, you talk about like how the Western filmmakers and audience always seek for like conflicts in a scene. It's like if you go into a scene, it's like you have a objective, and then you have these obstacles, and the drama happens when someone overcomes those obstacles. However, you felt like the more kind of traditional Chinese way of understanding drama is more like you have a state of mind, the 境界, and then you kind of got into this, dilemma of in which way you should kind of make your film steering to. So I was just wondering because what happened to me is kind of a very similar situation. So I would love
maybe we need to leave some airspace. Sorry. Maybe
sorry.
Could we just end the question there? And I think there's plenty to answer. But I was wondering if you.
I don't get up in the morning and think what I do. They use the eastern part or the western part. I just try to make a scene work. I think I grew up in Taiwan. That decides what kind of character I am, how I look at the world. So anything I do, even Brokeback Mountain, there's a Chineseness, Taiwanese in it. So I don't think about that too much. I try to make him understand. If he understands, that must be good. If he's interested, that must be good. If between the two of us, it's like a sounding board. But I will tell you. I was a theater major. I was very much into theater. 3 years back in Taiwan, 2 years in U of I, before I went to NYU Film School. So theater is really my background. So to dramatize, portraying, acting, all that, even to some degree storytelling skills, what I use is pretty Western. I think they're definitely a lot stronger than us, how I was brought up. The I Ching, the state of mind, you cannot even translate that word. It's like between willing and unwilling, knowing, unknown, that sort of. They don't get it.
Certain things I'll never understand.
It's hard, but that's where I come from. Make peace, make big things small. And in the Western, my skill, drama, is to make small things big. So they feed off each other. You got to try and error. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. That just confuse people. I just do my best. I got both East and West, but my point of view was very much established when I grew up in Taiwan.
Thank you. I want to ask about the collaborative creativity part. I'm fascinated by so many of your films, but I remember watching some of the early ones and then seeing The Ice Storm and thinking, now how can a Taiwanese guy get American suburbia so brutally accurately? And then I saw the panel earlier and I'm like, it's the sidekick, of course. But I'm sure it's more I'm sure it's more complicated than that. And so I guess what I'd be curious to hear about is there an example or two of a problem you solved together that you couldn't have solved on your own? And I'm just curious to hear about that process of bouncing ideas and solving those problems back and forth.
Well, look, one answer to that question, because we would do, especially after Sense and Sensibility, we would do the press tours, and some people, would always say, "How is it that this Chinese guy can, blah blah blah?" And my answer was invariably he's really good. I also get the benefit of being moved around at events like this, and even psychically for Ang, of standing in. I'm almost I'm a stand-in for the 2,000 other collaborators on every movie. So good directors really don't, they literally don't go and say, I've got this movie, I know exactly what it's going to look like, I know exactly how it's going to be acted, I know exactly how it's going to be edited. They throw together just this maelstrom of creativity, and then they have to ride it and shape it. And sometimes that means just letting it drift along a path that they may or may not have ever foreseen, and then owning it retroactively and signing off. And at the end of the day, it is the auteur's decision. I'm kind of into the auteur practice, if not the theory. So I do get to be a kind of a stand-in for what is essentially a great process. There are some directors who I do believe keep tighter and closer to their own specific idea, but generally they're not the successful directors.
Well, I add to that. For something like The Ice Storm, there's more psychic than James. Fortunately, I don't make those movies by myself overnight. The problem with that movie is not knowing enough information, because every one of them, a lot of them, they grow up as a kid, like in the movie in '73, and now they're the parents. So the kids and parents, we're making a movie now, and we're portraying their childhood. So my problem is really who to listen to. They all give me so much information. They're different. How do we use the bond? It just goes on and on. What picture put on the wall? What to wear? It's on and on and on and on. I don't know which one to listen to. So that was the main problem. Of course, that's a high-class problem. I think my vision is how to pick them and still have a clear vision what the movie's about.
Let's take one brief question. Last question, okay?
Hi, I have a quick question for Professor Schamus. I'm kind of curious, after you got your PhD degree from Berkeley, what made you to go into the film industry, and how did you start writing your first screenplay?
Yeah, actually, I was all but dissertation and went to New York because my girlfriend dumped me, and I had finished all my classwork, and I hadn't any loans, so was a really good situation, and I had no idea that I would actually end up in the film business. I got stuck there helping out with a lot of great filmmakers, Todd Haynes and Christine Vachon, and it was only years later when Berkeley asked me to give the commencement address, and I was so embarrassed by not having finished my dissertation that I said, I refuse to do it this year, but I will rematriculate and finish my dissertation and do it next year. So that's how that all came about. I needed a deadline. You either have to pay me or give me a deadline and just morally just pummel me. That's how I get work done. So it's been fun though, because this past 24 years of making movies, I've maintained my role as a professor at Columbia, and so you do have these strange, this kind of strange back and forth. I don't really perceive the two worlds as absolutely different, academia and the so-called real world. I think of academia, especially if you've been as some of the faculty meetings I've been at, as far more real world than Hollywood will ever be. But it's also true that I do get the opportunity. For example, I am teaching Adorno this week, and so, or last week I was teaching, and it's bizarre. You'll have these serendipitous moments when Adorno does launch in, and we're working on Fraser and Ali. And we've been hearing phrases. I'm hearing a little Judith Butler in the performance and the identity thing, and I'm actually giving a talk with Judy next week. And so these are kind of crazy moments when I get to put together what's obviously a very sundered kind of multi-self, right? And but it is true. I think that stuff. People say, "Oh, how much of your theory?" Gets nothing. It doesn't matter. You can make movies without studying film theory. But for me, that kind of continuum of questioning and having students really respond back very deeply to some of the text that I'll put forward, and even this question about styles of narrative. I was teaching David Bordwell's narration in the fiction film a few weeks ago. And I think he's really about the most brilliant film critic and historian out there. But it is also true that is a textbook on Western ideology, and the idea of this kind of, as Adorno will put it, as we were reading later, there are no more heroes. There are just simply successes, that kind of problem solving and overcoming quote obstacles that Hollywood cinema has instantiated in us. So you really have the benefit of this ongoing discussion in work. And having a partner like this who actually puts up with that kind of discussion really makes a difference, really does. So hopefully, looking around, I think there are a number of people who aspire to the film industry. I personally do not suggest the PhD is the path to your career. It just doesn't work that way. But to the extent to which you find people you can actually talk about why you're doing what you're doing, that's pretty cool. And this guy pretty much stands as in the pantheon of people you can actually have a conversation with. That helps.
An, do you have anything more you would like to add? Or are you going to end on the canon use of bongs?
Kind of use?
Of bongs.
I just feel very fortunate I get to make those movies. I initiate them. I participate in them. I don't feel I created them. And that's the one thing. The creation of the film doesn't complete until the audience sees the movie and you see what the chemistry is. It doesn't complete until then. I'm more like a vehicle, more like a vessel than the creator. In doing American movies, I have to put my name up as Ang Lee film. That's the rule. When I have a choice, in Chinese pictures I made, I never put that up.
Oh, interesting.
I don't like the idea. I like the idea. Everybody think you did it by yourself. No, it's good for my ego. I didn't do that. You get all the credit, and also get all the blames. Neither one is fair. But I'm important in making those movies because they're my movie. They're my vision. They are something I wanted to do. There are things I want to figure out through those images. Hulk, for example, there are some images, they give me nightmares. It come back haunt me. I couldn't sleep at night. They're like devils in me. It won't happen to them. They know exactly. They know better what I'm doing maybe, but those images don't haunt them probably. They have different effects on them. I think it had different effect on the audience. They watch it. I couldn't believe something came from the back of my head and have effect on people. sometimes in the theater, I watch people watching my movie. I see the face reflect on the flickering, those lights coming from the screen, silver screen. And you see their face do wonders. I don't know what hits them. It's a wonder. Now, I love this. It's not a job. I like what I do, but I also suffer for it. I think that's my life. I don't really have much more to say, but I appreciate a chance like this. People talk about my movies and thinking nobler thoughts or more reasonable thoughts. Of course, I think even to them it's very limited. That's why I often think a movie theater is like this black box. Only through pretense that we actually get to touch the truth. We can communicate with each other, something we don't use verbal to communicate because it'd be too harsh. What kind of monster we are. But that absurdity, the violence, whatever, that we get to be in a black house and pretend something else, and we touch each other and communicate with each other in a deeper level. Some we can articulate, some we can't. I think that's movie for me. It's a discovery of ourselves and our relationship. I think it's a wonderful somebody invent this, that we do this, we talk about this. It's very precious to me. So thank you, for the event. It's lovely.
Well, I want to say thank you to Eileen, and and we look forward to many more films from both of you, from you. I'm personally so grateful. I mean, I think it's a little creepy, probably having people tell you that they change your life. I mean, you change their lives, but I think it's actually true for a lot of us. So please join me in thanking James Schamus.